You look like a whole gorilla trying to squeeze into first class. Back of the line, animal!
Gate 19, 6:45 a.m. 30 passengers heard it. Not one moved. Whitney Walker's jaw tightened. Her grip on the portfolio turned her knuckles white, but her voice came out steady.
Seat 2A. First class. Scan it.
He snatched her carry-on, held it up like roadkill, and dumped it onto the luggage cart.
Even your bag is falling apart.
The clasp cracked open. Her clothes spilled halfway out onto the dirty cart floor.
Guess cheap follows cheap, huh?
Whitney glanced at her bag, then back at the form in her portfolio. She kept writing. Not a complaint. Something much, much worse. He had no idea who she was, and by the time he found out, every word he just said had already cost him everything. Let me take you back to the beginning. 5:32 a.m. Charlotte Douglas International Airport, Terminal C. The sky outside was still dark, just a thin line of orange bleeding across the horizon through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The terminal smelled like burnt coffee and floor cleaner. Gate announcements echoed overhead, bouncing off tile floors and empty seats. Most passengers were half asleep, slumped in chairs, necks bent at bad angles, jackets pulled over their faces like blankets. Gate 19 was quiet. Flight 1843 to Chicago O'Hare wasn't boarding for another hour. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past the empty check-in counter. The overhead lights buzzed that low, tired hum that every airport has at dawn. This was the kind of morning where nothing was supposed to happen, but something was already in motion. Whitney Walker stepped off the escalator and into Terminal C at exactly 5:35. She walked with purpose, not fast, not slow. The kind of walk that says, I know exactly where I'm going, and I don't need your help getting there. She wore dark slacks, a cream blouse, and a fitted black blazer. No logos, no designer labels on display. The only accessory was a slim silver watch on her left wrist. Her hair was pulled back neat. Her makeup was minimal, just enough to say professional without trying too hard. She pulled a leather carry-on behind her with one hand. A laptop bag hung from her shoulder. Under her arm, she carried a leather portfolio, the old-school kind with a brass clasp and a pen loop on the spine. She looked like any other businesswoman catching an early flight. That was the point. Whitney Walker was not just any passenger. She was the regional director of compliance and field audits for SkyPoint Airlines. 12 years with the company. She started as a gate agent herself, working the same counters, scanning the same boarding passes, dealing with the same angry passengers at 5 in the morning. She worked her way up, gate agent to shift lead to operations coordinator to regional compliance, and now, director. Her job was simple on paper. Fly routes undercover, watch how staff treat passengers, file reports. Those reports could lead to retraining, suspension, or termination. Today was not a random trip. Gate 19 at Charlotte Douglas had received 14 passenger complaints in the last 6 months. 11 of those complaints named the same employee, a gate agent named Derek Lawson. The complaints described the same patterns over and over: rude behavior, selective enforcement of baggage rules, racially targeted comments aimed at passengers of color. 14 complaints, 11 naming the same man, and not one had led to real action. Until now. Whitney had a pre-approved suspension authorization sitting in her portfolio, signed by Gregory Adams, the VP of Operations. All she needed was field confirmation, to see it with her own eyes. She found a seat near Gate 19, set her bags down, and opened her portfolio. She uncapped her pen and wrote the date at the top of the audit form. Then she waited. At 6:15, Derek Lawson clocked in. He walked behind the counter like he owned the whole terminal. Stocky build, cropped hair, a pair of sunglasses pushed up on his head, indoors. He wore the standard Sky Point polo, but he'd rolled the sleeves up tight around his biceps. A Bluetooth earpiece sat in his right ear. He dropped his thermos on the counter, popped the lid, and took a long sip. Then he leaned against the back wall and started chatting with a coworker, laughing, loud, not a care in the world. He didn't greet the first passenger who walked up, or the second. He let them stand there while he finished his conversation, then finally looked up with an expression that said, "You're interrupting me." Whitney watched all of this from her seat. She wrote it down. The gate area slowly filled. Business travelers in wrinkled suits, a young mother bouncing a toddler on her hip, a group of college kids in hoodies and slides. Brenda Collins, a white woman in her 60s with reading glasses and a paperback novel, settled into a seat 3 rows from the counter. She was a retired schoolteacher from Raleigh, quiet, observant, the kind of woman who notices everything and says nothing. Troy Henderson, a black college student in a gray hoodie, sat near the window, earbuds in, scrolling his phone. He was flying home to Chicago for his mother's birthday. None of them knew what was about to happen. At 6:40, Whitney stood up, straightened her blazer, and walked toward the counter. She had the audit form ready, the suspension authorization in her portfolio, the complaint file memorized. All she needed was confirmation. Derek Lawson was about to give her more than enough. Whitney stepped up to the counter and set her boarding pass down gently. She didn't cut in line. She didn't raise her voice. She waited until the passenger before her finished and then stepped forward like any normal traveler. Derek was leaning against the back wall, thermos in hand, still mid-conversation with his coworker. He didn't look up. Whitney waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. She cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, I'd like to confirm my seat assignment, please." Derek held up one finger without turning around, the universal sign for wait. He kept talking, something about a football game last weekend. His coworker laughed. 20 seconds. 30. Whitney didn't tap the counter. She didn't sigh loud enough for him to hear. She stood still, hands folded over her portfolio, and waited. Finally, Derek turned around. He looked at Whitney the way you'd look at a fly that landed on your food. What? Not "how can I help you?" Not "good morning." Just what? "I'd like to confirm my seat, please, and I submitted an upgrade request last week. Could you check on that?" Derek picked up her boarding pass with 2 fingers, like it was dirty. He glanced at it, then glanced at her. "Seat 2A, first class." He said it slow, like the words didn't match the person standing in front of him. "That's correct." He tossed the boarding pass back on the counter. "Yeah, I don't think so. System probably glitched. You sure you didn't book basic economy?" "I'm sure. Seat 2A, first class, confirmed 3 days ago." Derek sucked his teeth and turned to his screen. He typed something, clicked something, took his time. "All right, it says 2A. Fine. But that bag," he pointed at her carry-on, "that's oversized. You're gonna have to gate check it." Whitney looked at her bag. It was a standard leather carry-on. She'd flown with it dozens of times on Skypoint flights. It fit in the overhead bin on every single aircraft in the fleet. "This bag meets size requirements. I've traveled with it on this airline for years." "Well, today it doesn't meet my requirements. Gate check it or you don't board." "Would you like me to place it in the sizer? It'll fit." Derek leaned forward on the counter. "I don't need a sizer. I can eyeball it. And I'm telling you, it's too big. End of discussion." He reached under the counter, pulled out a pink gate check tag, and slapped it down next to her boarding pass. "Tag it, check it, or step aside." Whitney didn't pick up the tag. She looked at Derek for a long moment. Then she said, calmly, "May I have your full name and employee ID, please?" Something flickered across Derek's face. Just for a second. Then the smirk came back. Derek, that's all you need. I'd like your last name and your badge number, please. And I'd like $1 million. We don't always get what we want, do we, sweetheart? His coworker behind him snorted a laugh, then turned away. Whitney noted his badge number anyway. It was right there on his lanyard. DL4189. She wrote it in her portfolio without looking down. She'd been doing this long enough to write blind. Then it happened. A white man in a navy blazer stepped up beside Whitney, mid-40s, leather duffel bag over his shoulder, a bag that was clearly, visibly larger than Whitney's carry-on. Not by a little, by a lot. The zipper was straining. A rolled-up jacket was stuffed on top, making it bulge at the seams. Derek looked at the man, looked at his bag, and smiled. "Morning, sir. Boarding pass?" The man handed it over. Derek scanned it, handed it back. "You're all set. Gates open in about 20 minutes. Have a great flight." The man walked past. No bag check. No pink tag. No, "That's oversized." Nothing. Whitney watched the whole thing. She didn't say a word. She just wrote it down. Derek caught her writing and leaned over the counter. "What are you doing? Writing a letter to the mayor or something?" He grinned. "That's cute. Real cute. I'd like to speak to a supervisor, please." Derek straightened up and crossed his arms. "You're looking at him. I'm the supervisor on duty right now." That was a lie. Whitney knew it was a lie. The station manager on shift was Janet Moore. Her name was on the duty roster Whitney had reviewed before arriving. Derek Lawson was a gate agent, nothing more. "You're the supervisor," Whitney repeated. "That's what I said. So whatever little complaint you're working on, you can hand it right to me." He held out his hand and wiggled his fingers. "Come on, give it here. I'll file it for you." Whitney didn't hand him anything. She said, "I'd like to speak with Janet Moore, please." The smirk dropped. Just for half a second. "Who told you that name?" "She's the station manager on duty. I'd like to speak with her." Derek's jaw shifted. He didn't like that she knew the name. He didn't like that she wasn't afraid of him. He didn't like any of this. "Janet's busy. You're dealing with me. Now step aside so I can board actual passengers." He waved the next person forward, an older white couple with matching rolling bags. Whitney didn't move. She stayed right there at the counter. "Ma'am, I said step aside." "And I said I'd like to speak with your station manager." Derek's nostrils flared. He picked up his walkie-talkie and pressed the button. But he didn't call Janet Moore. "Yeah, this is Lawson at Gate 19. I need assistance. Got an uncooperative passenger here refusing to clear the boarding counter." He said it loud. He wanted her to hear. He wanted everyone to hear. Brenda Collins looked up from her paperback. Her reading glasses slid down her nose. She closed the book slowly, keeping one finger on her page. Troy Henderson pulled one earbud out. The older couple that Derek had waved forward stepped back instead, not wanting any part of whatever was happening. Derek set the walkie-talkie down and turned back to Whitney. "Last chance, ma'am. Move, or I'll have security move you." Whitney opened her portfolio to a fresh page. She wrote down the time. She wrote down what he just said into the walkie-talkie, word for word. Then she looked up at him. "I'm not going anywhere." Derek stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he reached across the counter and grabbed her carry-on, the one he'd already put a pink tag on. He didn't place it on the cart. He lifted it with one hand and threw it. It tumbled off the edge of the luggage cart and hit the ground behind the counter. The clasp, already cracked from before, broke completely. The bag flopped open. A blouse sleeve spilled out onto the dirty floor. 2 passengers gasped. A woman covered her mouth. Troy Henderson raised his phone and hit record. Derek pointed at Whitney. There, your bag's checked. Now get out of my line before I have you escorted out of this airport. Whitney looked at her bag on the ground, her blouse on the dirty floor, the broken clasp. She took a slow breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Then she looked back at Derek, picked up her pen, and kept writing. Derek wasn't done. He was just getting started. He leaned over the counter toward Whitney like a man who had never been told no in his entire life. His voice dropped low, not quiet, just controlled. The kind of low that says, I'm about to make your life very difficult. You know what your problem is? You people always think you're entitled to something. You walk up in here with your little attitude, your fake boarding pass, acting like you belong in first class. You don't. You never did. And everybody here knows it. He swept his hand across the gate area like the 30 passengers sitting there were his jury. Nobody nodded. Nobody agreed. But nobody spoke up either. Whitney kept her eyes on him, steady, unblinking. Her pen hovered over the form. Are you done? She said. Am I done? Derek laughed and slapped the counter. Oh, I haven't even started, sweetheart. You want to play this game? Fine. Let's play. He picked up the desk phone. Not the walkie-talkie this time, the actual phone. He dialed 3 digits, the airport police extension, and put it on speaker. Yeah, this is Derek Lawson at Gate 19, Terminal C. I need officers here immediately. I've got a black female passenger causing a disturbance. She's being aggressive, refusing to comply with boarding procedures, and I feel threatened. He said black female, like he was filing a report on a stray dog. He said feel threatened while leaning casually on the counter with a smirk on his face. Whitney heard every word through the speaker. So did every passenger within 30 feet. She pulled out her personal phone, not to record, not to call anyone publicly. She opened her messages and texted Calvin Brooks, her colleague from the compliance office who was in the airline's operations center in the same terminal. The text was short. Gate 19. It's everything the complaints described. Worse. Come now, bring the file. She put her phone away and kept writing. Derek hung up the phone and crossed his arms. He was enjoying this now. You could see it in the way he rocked back on his heels, the way his chin tilted up, the way he looked at Whitney like she was already gone. Police are on the way, ma'am. You had your chance to walk. Now you get to be walked. 3 minutes passed. The gate area was dead silent. The only sounds were the low hum of the AC system, a distant gate announcement for a Denver flight, and the scratch of Whitney's pen on paper. Then 2 airport security officers appeared at the end of the corridor, both in uniform, both walking with that deliberate, heavy pace that security uses when they've been told there's a problem. Derek straightened up. He smoothed his polo. He put on his best, concerned employee face. Officers, thank you for coming. This woman here, he pointed at Whitney. She's been causing problems since she got to my counter, refused a bag check, got aggressive with me. I asked him multiple times to step aside and she won't move. The first officer, a tall man with a gray mustache, looked at Whitney. Then he looked at Derek. Ma'am, can I see your ID and boarding pass? Whitney handed them over without hesitation. No fumbling, no shaking hands. She held them out the way someone hands over documents when they've done absolutely nothing wrong. The officer looked at the boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class. He looked at her ID. He looked back at her. And what exactly happened here, sir? He turned to Derek. Like I said, she refused to gate check her bag, started getting hostile, and she's been standing here blocking the counter for the past 15 minutes. The second officer, a shorter woman with her hair pulled tight, looked at Whitney again. Hands at her sides, portfolio under her arm, pen clipped to the spine, standing perfectly still. "Ma'am, were you hostile?" "No, ma'am, I was not. I asked to confirm my seat. He demanded I gate-check a regulation-size bag. I asked for a supervisor. He refused and called you instead." The first officer turned to Derek. "She asked for a supervisor and you called us?" Derek's jaw tightened. "She was causing a scene. I used my judgment." "Your judgment." The officer repeated it flat. Then Brenda Collins stood up. She was 63 years old, retired schoolteacher from Raleigh. She had been sitting there the entire time with her paperback in her lap and her reading glasses on her nose. She hadn't said a word until now. "Officers, that is not what happened." Every head turned. "I've been sitting right here since 6 o'clock. I watched the whole thing. That woman was polite from the moment she walked up to the counter. She asked for her seat. She asked about her bag. She asked for a supervisor. She never raised her voice once. Not once." Brenda pointed at Derek. "He insulted her. He threw her bag. Threw it. I watched her clothes fall out onto the floor. And then he called you and said she was aggressive. That was a lie. I watched the whole thing." Derek's face shifted. The smirk cracked. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. It concerns every person sitting at this gate." Troy Henderson stood up next. He held his phone at chest height, screen facing out. "I got all of it on video. Everything. From the moment he grabbed her bag." Derek looked at Troy, looked at the phone, looked at the officers. For the first time since Whitney walked up to his counter, Derek Lawson looked unsure. But he recovered fast. Men like Derek always do. He turned to the officers and puffed his chest. "Look, I don't care what these people think they saw. I have the authority to deny boarding to any passenger I deem disruptive. That's SkyPoint policy. And this woman," he jabbed his finger toward Whitney, "is denied boarding." He reached across the counter, picked up Whitney's boarding pass, the one the officer had just handed back to her, and tore it in half. Right down the middle. Clean rip. He dropped both pieces on the counter like confetti. "Done. She's off the flight. Officers, please escort her out." The gate area went dead. A woman in row 4 covered her mouth. A man in a business suit shook his head slowly. The young mother bouncing her toddler pulled the child closer. Whitney looked at the torn boarding pass. 2 halves sitting on the counter under the fluorescent light. She picked up both pieces, carefully, like evidence. She placed them inside her portfolio, right next to the form she'd been writing on this whole time. The officers exchanged a glance. Neither of them moved to touch Whitney. The one with the gray mustache keyed his radio and spoke quietly into it. The shorter officer turned to Derek. "Sir, we're going to need you to step back from the counter." "What? I'm the one who called you." "And we're asking you to step back." The 2 security officers stood between Whitney and Derek now. Derek was breathing hard. His face was red. The smirk was gone. In its place was something uglier. The look of a man who realized he might not be winning anymore, but refused to stop swinging. Whitney stood still, portfolio closed, pen clipped, hands at her sides. She wasn't waiting for the officers to save her. She wasn't waiting for the passengers to defend her. She was waiting for Calvin Brooks. And right on time, she saw him. Walking down the corridor toward Gate 19 with a thick manila folder under his arm and a corporate SkyPoint lanyard swinging from his neck. Not a field employee lanyard, not a gate agent badge. A corporate lanyard. The kind that opens every door in the building. He was walking fast, and he was not smiling. Calvin Brooks reached Gate 19 and walked straight past the security officers like they weren't there. He stopped beside Whitney and held out the manila folder. "Director Walker, the complaint file you requested." Director Walker. 2 words. That was all it took. Derek's face went blank. Not angry, not scared, just empty. Like his brain heard the words but couldn't process them fast enough. The first security officer looked at Calvin, looked at his corporate lanyard, looked at Whitney. "Director," the officer repeated. Calvin nodded. "Whitney Walker, Regional Director of Compliance and Field Audits, SkyPoint Airlines." He said it clear. He said it loud enough for the entire gate area to hear. Not shouting, just the kind of voice that fills a room because every word matters. Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Whitney took the folder from Calvin and opened it right there on the counter. Inside were 14 printed complaints, each one dated and documented, each one describing the same patterns: rude behavior, selective baggage enforcement, racially targeted language. 11 of the 14 named the same gate agent, Derek Lawson. Beneath the complaints sat a single document with a blue signature line at the bottom. A pre-approved suspension authorization, signed by Gregory Adams, Vice President of Operations. The authorization had been pending for 2 weeks. It needed only one thing to become active: field confirmation from a compliance director who witnessed the behavior firsthand. Whitney had more than enough. She turned to Derek. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She spoke the way someone speaks when they don't need to prove anything. "My name is Whitney Walker. I am the Regional Director of Compliance and Field Audits for SkyPoint Airlines. I was sent to this gate specifically because of you, Mr. Lawson." She held up the form she'd been writing on since the moment she walked up to his counter. "This is a Field Audit Personnel Action Form. Section 1. Verbal abuse directed at a passenger based on race. Section 2. Selective enforcement of baggage policy. Section 3. Refusal to provide employee identification upon request. Section 4. False claim of supervisory authority. Section 5. Filing a false security report. Section 6. Deliberate destruction of a passenger's boarding pass. Section 7. Destruction of passenger property." She listed them the way a surgeon counts instruments: clean, precise, no emotion wasted. 7 violations documented in a single interaction. You confirmed every complaint in this file before I even needed to open it. Derek grabbed the edge of the counter. His knuckles turned white. His mouth moved, but the words came out broken. You should have told me. How was I supposed to know? You should have said something." Whitney closed the folder. "That's exactly the point, Mr. Lawson. I shouldn't have had to tell you who I was for you to treat me like a human being. The woman before me shouldn't have had to. The 14 passengers who filed complaints before me shouldn't have had to." She paused. "You didn't treat me that way because of what I did. You treated me that way because of what I look like. And you did it because you believed there would be no consequences." She set the folder on the counter between them. "You were wrong." Derek's legs buckled slightly. He caught himself on the counter. His coworker behind him had gone completely pale and stepped as far back as the wall would allow. The passengers at Gate 19 were frozen. Brenda Collins had her hand pressed flat against her chest. Troy Henderson was still recording, his phone steady, his mouth hanging open. Whitney turned to the security officers. Her voice was professional, calm. "Officers, thank you for your time. You're welcome to stand down. This is now an internal airline personnel matter." She pulled out her radio, a company-issued handset she'd been carrying in her laptop bag, and called Janet Moore. "Janet, this is Whitney Walker, Regional Compliance. I'm at Gate 19. I need you here now." 3 minutes later, Janet Moore appeared at the end of the corridor, walking fast, face tight. She already knew something had gone very, very wrong. Janet Moore arrived at Gate 19 out of breath. She was a white woman in her early 50s. Neat gray blazer, sky-point lanyard, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She'd been station manager at Charlotte Douglas for 9 years. She'd handled delays, cancellations, medical emergencies, and drunk passengers at 30,000 feet. But the look on her face when she saw Whitney Walker standing at the counter said she had never walked into anything like this. "Director Walker, I came as fast as I could. What happened?" Whitney didn't explain. She handed Janet the portfolio, the audit form, the complaint file, and the pre-approved suspension authorization. All of it. Janet read the audit form first. Her eyes moved line by line. Her lips pressed tighter with every section. When she got to Section 5, filing a false security report, her hand came up and covered her mouth. She looked at Derek. He was still standing behind the counter. His hands were shaking. His face had gone from red to gray. "Mr. Lawson." Janet's voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that's worse than yelling. "Is what's written on this form accurate?" Derek opened his mouth. Look, Janet, this whole thing got blown out of, is it accurate?" He swallowed. "She didn't tell me who she was. I was just doing my—" "You called her a gorilla, Derek." Silence. Total silence. The AC hummed. A boarding announcement played 2 gates over. Nobody at Gate 19 breathed. "You called a passenger, a director-level executive of this airline, a gorilla. You threw her bag on the ground. You tore up her boarding pass. You called airport police and told them she was aggressive when she was standing here with her hands at her sides." Janet set the portfolio down on the counter. "And I'm now learning that this isn't the first time. 14 complaints, Derek. 14. 11 with your name on them." Derek's voice cracked. "Janet, come on. You know me. Those complaints are... People exaggerate. You know how it... I know what I'm reading. And I know what these officers just witnessed." She turned to the security officers. "Did you witness the boarding pass being torn?" The officer with the gray mustache nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We were present." Janet turned back to Derek. "Mr. Lawson, you are suspended from duty effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. Please remove your lanyard and step away from the counter." Derek stared at her. His bottom lip trembled. He looked at Whitney. He looked at Calvin. He looked at the security officers. He was searching for someone, anyone who would take his side. Nobody did. "Janet, please. I've been here 6 years. You can't just lanyard. Now." Derek's hands went to his neck. He fumbled with the clip. His fingers were shaking so badly it took him 3 tries. When it finally came off, he held it out like it weighed 100 pounds. Janet took it from him without a word. "Officers, please escort Mr. Lawson to the employee exit. He is not to return to this terminal until further notice." The 2 officers stepped forward. Derek looked at them. The same officers he had called to remove Whitney. They were here for him now. He walked between them, head down, past every passenger he had performed for 20 minutes ago. Past Brenda Collins, who watched him over her reading glasses without blinking. Past Troy Henderson, who lowered his phone but didn't stop recording until Derek disappeared around the corner. Gone. Janet turned to Whitney. "Director Walker, I am deeply sorry. I'll have a replacement boarding pass printed immediately. And your bag, the clasp is broken. My clothes were on the floor." Janet closed her eyes for a second. "I'll have a replacement bag brought from our supply. Whatever was damaged, we'll replace it. All of it." Brenda Collins stood up from her seat and walked over. She stopped in front of Whitney and spoke softly. "I'm glad someone finally held him accountable. He did something similar to a young man last month. I was on that flight too. I didn't say anything that time. Her voice wavered. I should have. Whitney looked at her. You said something today. That matters. Troy Henderson walked over next, phone in his hand. I got the whole thing, from the bag throw to the boarding pass. You want me to send it to you? Whitney reached into her portfolio and pulled out a business card. Submit it through the airline's official complaint portal. The link's on the back. Your footage matters, not just for my case. Troy took the card and nodded. Janet handed Whitney a fresh boarding pass. Seat 2A, first class. The same seat she'd had all along. Whitney picked up her laptop bag, accepted the replacement carry-on a ground crew member brought over, and walked down the jet bridge. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She sat down in seat 2A, opened her laptop, and started typing the formal report. The cabin smelled like recycled air and fresh upholstery. The engine hum vibrated low through the floor. Outside the window, the sun had finally risen all the way, a clean line of gold across the Charlotte skyline. The flight to Chicago departed on time. Gate 19 was quiet again. But not for long. The investigation started before Whitney's flight even landed in Chicago. Janet Moore filed an emergency incident report within 30 minutes of Derek's removal. She attached Whitney's audit form, the pre-approved suspension authorization, and her own written account of what she witnessed when she arrived at Gate 19. By noon, the report was on Gregory Adams' desk. Gregory Adams, Vice President of Operations for SkyPoint Airlines, a man who had spent 22 years building the airline's reputation and did not enjoy watching it burn. He read Whitney's audit form 3 times. Then he picked up the phone. By 2 p.m., SkyPoint Airlines had opened a formal internal review of all operations at Gate 19, Charlotte Douglas International Airport. The scope wasn't limited to Derek Lawson. It covered every complaint filed against that gate in the past 18 months, every shift log, every duty roster, and every employee who had overlapped with Lawson during his 6-year tenure. But Derek was the center of it, and the evidence was overwhelming. 14 passenger complaints, Whitney's 7-section audit form documenting live violations, testimony from 2 airport security officers, a written witness statement from Brenda Collins, and 43 minutes of unedited video from Troy Henderson's phone. 43 minutes. Every word, every gesture, every smirk. Derek Lawson was terminated on Thursday, 2 days after the incident. Not suspended pending review, not reassigned to another terminal. Terminated. His badge was deactivated, his access was revoked. His employee file was marked with a note that would follow him to any airline that ever ran a background check. 6 years behind that counter. Gone in 48 hours. But that was just the beginning. Troy Henderson uploaded his video that same Thursday evening. He edited it down to 12 minutes, blurred the faces of bystanders, but left Derek's face fully visible. He was a gate agent in uniform, acting in an official capacity, in a public terminal. There was no expectation of privacy. Troy posted it with a single caption. This is what happened at Gate 19. By Friday morning, the video had 600,000 views. By Friday night, 2.1 million. By Sunday, 4.2 million. The comment section exploded. Thousands of people sharing their own stories, their own Gate 19 moments. The time they were pulled aside, the time their bag was searched, the time they were told they didn't belong somewhere they had every right to be. The media picked it up on Saturday, local news first. WCNC Charlotte ran a segment that evening with the headline, Airline Agent Caught on Camera Hurling Black Passenger's Bag. Turns out she was his boss's boss. Then national. CNN. MSNBC. CBS. Morning. The story moved fast because it had everything: the video, the racial slurs, the false police report, the torn boarding pass, and the twist that the woman he targeted was the one executive sent specifically to evaluate him. Reporters reached out to SkyPoint Airlines for comment. For 24 hours, the airline said nothing. Then, on Monday morning, Gregory Adams held a press conference at the airline's headquarters in Dallas. He stood behind a podium with the SkyPoint logo on the front. Navy suit, no smile. He read from a prepared statement, but his voice carried the weight of a man who meant every word. The airline confirmed that Derek Lawson had been terminated for gross misconduct, including racial discrimination, destruction of passenger property, filing a false security report, and violation of SkyPoint's code of conduct. But Adams didn't stop there. He announced 3 immediate actions. First, mandatory bias and de-escalation training for every customer-facing employee across all SkyPoint hubs, effective within 90 days. Second, a new complaint escalation protocol that required any employee receiving 3 or more complaints within a 6-month window to be placed under automatic review. Third, an independent external audit of all discrimination-related complaints filed with the airline in the past 2 years. He called it a systemic failure that allowed one employee's behavior to continue unchecked for far too long. He didn't name Whitney directly, but he didn't need to. The legal consequences came next. Whitney filed a civil complaint against SkyPoint Airlines and Derek Lawson individually. The complaint cited racial discrimination, destruction of personal property, emotional distress, and denial of services based on race. Her attorney filed it in Mecklenburg County Superior Court on Wednesday, 8 days after the incident. But it wasn't just civil. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office opened its own review after watching Troy's video. The focus: Derek's phone call to airport police. He had told officers that Whitney was aggressive and that he felt threatened. The video showed a woman standing still with her hands at her sides. She never raised her voice. She never moved toward him. She never touched him. Derek had filed a false security report. In North Carolina, that's a Class 2 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 60 days in jail and a fine of up to $1,000. But the DA's office pushed for a Class 1 misdemeanor under aggravating circumstances, arguing that the false report was racially motivated and made to a law enforcement entity, which elevated the potential consequences to up to 120 days in jail. Derek was formally charged 3 weeks after the incident. His attorney tried to negotiate. He offered community service. He offered a public apology. He offered to attend sensitivity training. The DA's office didn't budge. They wanted a guilty plea on record. It took 2 months. Derek's attorney filed 3 separate motions to dismiss. Each one was denied. The video was too clear. The witnesses were too consistent. The audit form was too detailed. Derek pleaded guilty. Judge Patricia Sullivan sentenced him in a courtroom in downtown Charlotte on a Tuesday afternoon. The gallery was half full. Reporters, a few passengers from Gate 19, and 3 additional complainants who had come forward after the video went viral. The sentence: 180 days suspended, 2 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service at a civil rights organization in Charlotte, and a written public apology to be published on the Mecklenburg County Court website and submitted directly to Whitney Walker. Derek read the apology in court. His hands shook. His voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't make eye contact with anyone. The civil case settled out of court 6 weeks later. The terms were confidential, but SkyPoint Airlines issued one additional public commitment as part of the resolution: the creation of a permanent undercover compliance audit program embedded into the airline's operations manual nationwide. They named it the Walker Protocol. Whitney's name, permanently written into the system she'd spent 12 years trying to fix. 3 more passengers came forward after the trial. One of them was the young man Brenda Collins had mentioned, a 24-year-old graduate student who had been berated by Derek at Gate 19 4 months before Whitney's visit. He'd filed a complaint at the time. Nothing happened. Now something did. He received a private settlement and a personal letter of apology from Gregory Adams. Brenda Collins was interviewed by a local Charlotte news station 2 days after the sentencing. She sat in her living room in Raleigh, reading glasses on, hands folded in her lap. The reporter asked her why she spoke up that day at the gate. Brenda said, "I saw it happen twice. The first time I stayed quiet. I told myself it wasn't my business. I went home and I couldn't sleep. When I saw it happening again, to that woman at that same gate, I decided I would never be quiet again. Silence is a choice, and I made the wrong one the first time." Her interview was shared over 300,000 times. So, where are they now? Whitney Walker was promoted 6 months after the incident. She now serves as Vice President of Customer Experience and Compliance for SkyPoint Airlines. She oversees the Walker Protocol nationwide, the same program born from the worst morning of her career at Gate 19. She still flies undercover sometimes, not because she has to, because she wants to. She told a reporter once that the day she stops checking is the day the system stops working. Derek Lawson completed his 200 hours of community service at a civil rights center in Charlotte. He spent most of those hours sorting donations in a back room. He never worked in the airline industry again. His name still pulls up the video if you search it. It probably always will. Troy Henderson graduated from college the following spring. His video was cited in a congressional hearing on racial profiling in air travel, played on a screen in a Senate chamber in front of 14 lawmakers and a gallery full of cameras. Troy didn't testify. He didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. He's a journalist now, covers civil rights for a digital newsroom in Chicago. He says Gate 19 changed the direction of his life. Brenda Collins volunteers with a passenger advocacy nonprofit based in Raleigh. She visits airports twice a month, handing out pamphlets about passenger rights. She tells every person she meets the same thing. If you see something wrong, say something. Don't wait for the second time like I did. SkyPoint Airlines completed its independent audit 8 months after the incident. The audit uncovered 23 additional complaints across 5 hubs that had been filed and ignored over the previous 2 years. 12 employees were retrained, 4 were terminated. 2 station managers were reassigned for failure to escalate. The Walker Protocol is now permanent. Every SkyPoint hub in the country operates under it. Undercover compliance directors fly random routes every week. Employees don't know when. They don't know who. That's the point. And that's what stays with me. Whitney had the title. She had the authority. She had the folder, the form, the pre-approved suspension letter. She had 12 years of climbing through the same system that failed the 14 passengers before her. She had power. And that power is the only reason justice happened at Gate 19 that morning. But what about the people who don't have that? What about the woman at Gate 19 4 months earlier who filed a complaint and never heard back? What about the graduate student who was humiliated in front of a full boarding area and told to just move on? What about every person who's been called an animal, told they don't belong, had their property thrown on the ground, and didn't have a suspension form in their portfolio? The system didn't protect them. The system protected Derek Lawson. For 6 years, 14 complaints, and 11 named reports, until someone with more authority than him finally showed up. That shouldn't be what justice requires. You shouldn't need to outrank your abuser to be treated like a human being. You shouldn't need a title, a corporate lanyard, and a pre-signed authorization letter to get someone to stop calling you a gorilla. The system should work at Gate 19 for everyone, not just the director of compliance. So here's my question. If you were sitting at that gate, watching Derek tear up that boarding pass, watching him throw her bag on the ground, watching him call the police on a woman who never raised her voice, what would you have done? Would you have been Brenda the first time? Quiet, uncomfortable, telling yourself it wasn't your business? Or would you have been Brenda the second time? Standing up, speaking out, refusing to let silence win? Drop it in the comments. I want to know. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you angry, if it made you think, if it reminded you of something you've seen or something you've lived, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories where the truth doesn't stay buried. Because silence is a choice, and the wrong one costs more than you think.
14 complaints, 6 years, nothing happened, until the one woman who chose to eliminate was the one who could end it all with a single signature. Whitney had the title, she had the folder, she had the power, and that is the only reason Just did show up at gate 19. But what about the 14 people before her? They filed complaints, they told the truth, and the system looked the other way. It took someone who outran him to make anyone listen, not because the evidence wasn't there, it was always there, but because the system was built to protect the uniform, not the person standing in front of it. Whitney didn't just get Derek's fired, she proved something uncomfortable. Accountability shouldn't require a title, but that morning it did. So here's my question. When you see something wrong, not in a story, not on a screen, but right in front of you, what decides whether you speak or stay silent? Is it courage? Is it convenience? Or is it just whether anyone's watching? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this story stays with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe so you can catch the next one, because the silence is a choice and the wrong one always costs more than you think.